I came of age in a kind of era with public intellectuals, and somehow in our age of social media, that intellectual class has evaporated. There's a kind of a disturbing glibness to our debate.
Welcome to the Thought Leader Revolution with Nikki Ballou. Join the revolution. There's never been a better time in history to speak your truth, find your freedom, and make your fortune. Each week, we interview the world's top thought leaders and learn the secrets of how they built a 6 to 7 figure practice. This episode has been brought to you by eCircleacademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. I'm your host, Nikki Ballou, and boy, do we have a special guest lined up for you today. Today's guest is a true thought leader, someone who has spent his entire career being a conviction-based thought leader who fights for the ideals of liberty and for allowing the rest of us to be able to lead the types of lives that liberty makes possible. I'm speaking, of course, of none other than the one and only Dinesh D'Souza. Welcome to the show, Dinesh.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Great to have you here. So, Dinesh, I know who you are, but my audience may not all know who you are. So why don't we start by asking you to tell us your backstory? How'd you get to be the great Dinesh D'Souza?
Well, I'm a native of Bombay, India. I came to America at the age of 17. I was a young policy analyst in the Reagan White House in my 20s. And I've had a career mainly in so-called think tanks, research foundations, the American Enterprise Institute, the Hoover Institution, which is at Stanford. I've written a dozen or so books. And about 10 years ago, I started making documentary films. I'm probably best known today for the films. And I did the first one on Obama. I've done films on Hillary, on the history of the Democratic Party. The most recent one is called The Dragon's Prophecy, and it's about Israel and Islamic radicalism, and also the Bible. So it's an ambitious film that ties together politics and the Bible.
Tell us a bit about this particular film. What made you decide to make this film, and why now?
Well, I was riveted by the events of October 7th. I realized that many people had not seen the footage of October 7th, and I wanted to show some of it. But then I realized I wanted to examine the topic in its widest implications. I came across a book called The Dragon's Prophecy by a guy who argued that the battles that we see today between Israel and radical Islam are a kind of weird recreation of ancient battles that we see in the Bible between the Israelites and some of their classic enemies, notably the Philistines. And so I thought this is a very interesting and provocative, sort of historically textured type of argument. And so the film connects biblical archaeology and the present, and also a hint of biblical prophecy. So it's a little bit of a departure from me. My earlier films have all been in one way or another about the meaning of America. They've also been anchored in the political, not so much in the theological, but this film takes it all in.
And tell me, how have you been distributing your films? And in particular, how are you distributing this one? A, what's that been like, from the point of view of a thought leader putting films together? And B, how can people go see this film?
Well, the website is thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. The film is available on Apple iTunes. You can get DVDs at Walmart, at Amazon. And so there are a number of streaming platforms you can watch it on. Probably Apple is the easiest. And we're trying to get it up on Amazon Prime pretty soon. So we're trying to make it widely accessible. It was already in the theaters and did very well there. And it's now in streaming and DVD.
That's fantastic. Now, as a conservative dealing with cancel culture of the modern left, how have you found making these types of movies and getting them out there? Has that caused any special, challenges for you?
Well, there are some issues that raise security concerns. We've just seen from recent incidents, Charlie Kirk and so on, that
Sure.
the topics of abortion, the trans issue, and of course, Palestine, these are issues that tend to, send people over the edge, so to speak. And so, for example, we didn't have a movie premiere for this film. It's probably my first film where we didn't do a movie premiere. Why? Because of security. We thought we could have the normal security, but then they were like, no, you need a little army just because of the nature of the topic. And so that's a concern. That's something I had to think about really for the first time. The era of digital censorship, things are better now than they used to be. We don't have the rampant censorship that was commonplace on the digital platforms. But even so, on places like Facebook and Instagram, you still have to worry about running afoul of the digital supervisors.
How so?
Well, they give you strikes. They deplatform you. They restrict the reach of your channel. People spend a long time building up these channels. So, for example, I've got 2.5 million or so on Facebook, about 1 million on Instagram, but they're pretty arbitrary. I mean, in the wake, for example, of the Kyle Rittenhouse situation, where I basically said, look, I think the guy was defending himself. I was at risk of losing my entire channel. And there's no kind of easy process of getting it back. So this is how these digital overlords behave. Utterly irresponsible, by the way. As I say, the atmosphere is better now, but we're still not in the clear.
Well, I'll tell you, we got connected through our mutual friend, Wayne Allen Root, and I've written 2 books with Wayne. And one of the books we wrote is called The Great Patriot Boycott Book, which is a list of 123 patriotic American companies that people should buy from. Before that, we wrote the Great Patriot Boycott Book of woke companies not to buy from. But the boycott book, Wayne is friends with the president, and he handed a copy over to him, and the president kind of perused it and said, this is great. And he truthed about it, right, on Truth Social. And we were so excited. We thought, oh my God, this is it. This is going to go viral. And it did for about a day. 175 major media outlets picked it up. And a day later, Amazon canceled my account and said, you have plagiarized this book. And so we're erasing your account. And I got to tell you, it took 3 weeks of battling just to get them to put the account back in there. And at that time, obviously we lost all the momentum that we would have had as a result of President Trump's very gracious endorsement of the book. So cancel culture still definitely is a real thing.
Amazon is notorious for this. What they've done with us is they have either pulled our DVDs or they just announced out of stock. Even though the film is new, DVDs are widely available. They have a lot of them either available to them or in a warehouse, and yet they just declare it's going to take you 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks to get a DVD. And like you say, what they're doing is trying to kill the momentum behind your product. And so it's very disheartening because the documentary film business, which I'm in, is a hard business as it is. It's difficult to get people to get in a car, go to a theater to watch the film. And so even after you make the sale, when you have the retailer step in and go, well, we're going to make it extremely difficult for people to even get it, then you have to sort of throw up your hands a little bit. And so these are the practical ways in which they squelch you.
Yeah, no question. No question it still happens. But, Dinesh, you've done a phenomenal job of reaching your audience despite all this. And you've been somebody who's taken a 4-square stand for freedom your entire career. And I wonder if you would mind explaining to people why you do that, even though you get attacked. You probably get attacked as much as any conservative out there because of the bold stands that you take. What has you persevere and continue?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. One is I feel a sense of gratitude to a certain view of America that has enabled me to have a good life here and find an American dream. And so those principles, it seems to me, are fragile. They can be overthrown. They're not common in the world. And they are very controversial now, even in America. There are many people in America trying to stamp out that America that I'm defending. And so this has become a kind of mission for me. I see it, as protecting the infrastructure and the country that has given me a certain type of life that I would not otherwise have had. I think also there's a generational shift. I came of age in a kind of, you can say, a intellectual era with public intellectuals, people like Irving Kristol and Robert Bork and Jean Kirkpatrick, and so many others, Thomas Sowell. And somehow in our age of social media, that intellectual class has evaporated. Now, some of them became never Trumpers, and so they went kind of in the wrong path, or they kind of got off the road. But in other cases, it's simply a matter of the fact that we have an environment of, podcasters and pundits. And so I think that there is a real need to try to elevate the debate and bring some of these real issues to the forefront. A good example of this is I had a debate some months ago with Nick Fuentes, and he was like, regime change is a terrible idea. And I'm like, well, what's your historical basis for saying that? Well, he goes, well, Iraq. So you have a young guy whose sample size, historical sample size, is limited to one case, and has no sort of sense of history, how regime changes have turned out all over the world over, let's say, the past 50 or 75 years. And so there's a kind of a disturbing glibness to our debate. And parts of it I like. I mean, I like the fact that we are in a visual culture. Of course, films appeal to the head and the heart. So I'm not against, the emotionalism of our debates today, but I just think that they lack a certain depth and texture. And so I'm doing my best, as best I can, to bring that to the public debate.
God bless you for it, my friend. God bless you for it. I went back on YouTube and I watched some of the Buckley versus Gore debates from back in the day. And I'm a conservative, so I was sympathetic to Buckley's side, but I could see Gore was a masterful debater. That guy really knew how to position his arguments well. And I learned from watching these two men speak about important issues of the day. And I think it's really valuable for someone to do the types of thing that you're talking about, because many of the more popular podcasters today, I love their shows. They're great, but they're not people that have necessarily thought very deeply about the issues that they talk about. They're a mile wide and an inch deep at best in the areas that they venture into. So it's good to see someone like you acting as that last public intellectual and speaking about the issues that matter. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Second thing is, let's talk a bit about regime change. I don't know if Wayne mentioned, but I'm originally from Iran. In fact, I was born in Iran, and I came to the West when I was just shy of 15 years old. Most of my family is still back in Iran. And I've been going on TV shows like Wayne's and on Instagram platforms of other people talking about this. And if there was ever a regime that needed to be changed, it's the current regime in Iran, the Islamic Republic. And the argument that you can't do this because the country next door, Iraq, regime change failed there, I think is a specious one, because Iraq is a fake country that was created after World War I with no shared history, and Iran is the world's oldest continuous nation state. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, and I'm sure you've been following what's going on in Iran, and I've seen some of your posts on it. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think the United States facilitated regime change in Iran in 1979 in a very bad way.
Yep.
Jimmy Carter had campaigned on a human rights platform. One of the first things he said was the Shah of Iran is a dictator. He has a secret police, the Savak. We're going to pull the Persian rug out from under him. And guess what? We got Khomeini. So this is a violation of one of the core principles, not just of foreign policy, but of life in general. In trying to get rid of the bad guy, make sure you don't get the worst guy. In other words, this is the principle of the lesser evil. And it was flagrantly ignored, disregarded in that case. So the United States bears some culpability for the triumph of the mullahs. There were other factors, as you know, as well. Now, the thing about it is that here you have a country where all the ingredients are present of getting beneficial regime change. By the way, there's just a long list of countries where you've had regime change and it's turned out for the better. This is, World War II is only the most prominent example where you had regime change in, dozens of countries, and almost all of them turned out very well. But the Gulf War is another good example. Saddam Hussein was ejected from Kuwait. That was a good thing. That gave Kuwait back its autonomy. And so there is example after example. Ceausescu, for example, at the end of the Cold War, obviously a good idea to get him out of Romania. And of course, all over Eastern Europe, we saw regime change, again, all to the good. I think regime change today in Venezuela and Iran would be really great. And there is a virtual certainty, just given all the circumstances in both countries. By the way, my wife is Venezuelan, that you would see a better outcome. You can't predict it totally. And it's not easy, as you know, I think quite well, to root out. The Chavistas in Venezuela, the mullahs in Iran have probably deeply implanted themselves in the institutions of society. So it's going to take some effort to root out that influence and produce a genuine transformation. The Iranian Revolution has been around for nearly 50 years. But all that being said, it is hard to imagine an outcome in Iran that would be worse than what we have now. And quite likely, we will get a country much more responsive to the needs of the people and also beneficial for the United States. So the rationale for the United States getting involved is the moral rationale. It's good for the people. And number two, it's in the strategic interest of the United States. And both criteria are satisfied here.
I 100% agree with you. And the Shah, the late Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, when he was ruling Iran, Iran was a bulwark of stability in the Middle East. A lot of bad actors weren't able to operate because he was there. And he, as Ronald Reagan said in his one and only debate with Jimmy Carter, the Shah carried our water in that region for many, many years. And it was a travesty that we turned on him. And I agreed with that. And I believe getting rid of the mullahs in Iran will get rid of the funding for 85 to 90% of the regional bad actors, terrorist groups, etc. And that's going to create an oasis of stability in the Middle East. And I think you'll have a golden age of economic prosperity and peace in the Middle East that will be very much like what Donald Trump is creating in the United States. And Iran absolutely can be a force for good. And the people of Iran, Dinesh, they have stripped away every excuse I have for not going after my biggest dreams full force. Because if these young people can stand up and face bullets and walk into the fire in order to get their freedoms, I look at myself and I go, I got no excuses for not calling up and speaking to whoever I want to speak to and need to speak to. And for whatever reason in the past, I gave myself excuses to not go do that. They're astonishingly brave. And J.K. Rowling said they're a source of light in what has seemed like a very dark world. And I got to say, I think she's exactly bang on.
It's always inspiring to see people rise up. It's just the kind of cry for freedom that is appealing on the intellectual, the emotional level, both. I want to mention here the Reagan Doctrine, which is, I think, very applicable to both the cases of Venezuela and Iran. And the Reagan Doctrine is in between the idea of interventionism and occupation on the one hand, and sort of staying out of it, or a kind of isolationist approach on the other. The Reagan Doctrine is, look, people should fight for their own freedom. We don't fight, but we help. And you saw that principle at play, for example, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. The United States did not commit troops, but we sent advisors. We gave the forces opposing the Soviets, handheld rockets to shoot down Soviet helicopters. So I would envision the United States, I would like to see the United States play a supporting role in neutralizing the power of the mullahs and giving the people the strength and the resources that they need to be able to move effectively to topple this regime and establish a self-governing society. As you say, the Iranians know how to do it. They're an educated people. They have a grand and glorious history. Also, the Iranians, by the way, like the Venezuelans, they're two of the most patriotic people I've ever encountered. So a lot of them have the view that, hey, if we can fix our countries, we're ready to go back and be part of life over there. And that's always just a very inspiring thing to see.
I think it's really good policy for America First and MAGA to help the people of Iran and the people of Venezuela to take their countries back, because a lot of the people that were forced to leave their country to come to places like the United States will permanently relocate back as a result of this. So I think it nicely dovetails with President Trump's goal of making sure that immigration in the United States is legal and properly controlled. And anyone in the MAGA movement, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that is against this and is arguing, no, regime change is always bad. People like, Tucker Carlson and so forth really need to take a deeper look at this, because I don't think the situation in Iran is at all like the situation in Iraq or Afghanistan. And I think Iran will not suck up the resources of the United States. In fact, I think Iran will give them a massive opportunity to do business. American oil companies will have to go in and help rebuild the Iranian oil industry. There's billions of dollars to be made there. There's tons of gold and silver under the ground. Mining companies can help Iranians with that. And there's tons of top-level Silicon Valley talent, including the CEO of Uber, Dara Khosrowshahi, who have said that they want to go back and help create a nascent technology industry. I think this is just going to be an economic as well as a foreign policy and stability related boon for U.S. foreign policy. What are your thoughts on that?
I certainly agree. I do think that when we are trying to examine Tucker and some of these characters on the right, we have to realize that the principles that they invoke are usually fake, because they'll say something like, we're against regime change. And then if you said to Tucker, well, would you favor regime change in Israel? Yes. You know what I mean? So he's not against regime change. Or you say something like, Tucker will say something like, well, the United States does not want to get entangled with other countries abroad, because then they start dictating the terms and they start controlling your society. And then you say, well, Tucker, do you think the United States should draw closer to Qatar? Yes. So again, suddenly the principle quickly goes out the window. And so what you have here, I think, is a very bizarre enterprise to shift the position of the United States in a more anti-Jewish and anti-Israel direction, and consequently in a direction more favorable to radical Islam. I mean, it's so bewildering what the motive behind this is. It really defies explanation. I'm not sure I have a full handle on it, but what I can see is that the arguments are specious and the effects are very destructive.
Well, I have friends who are very senior people in Israel in business, and their theory is that some of these people on the right are actually paid assets. They're paid influencers who are espousing these positions because they're being very, very well paid, and they think that Qatar is paying them. I don't know if that's true or if it's not true, but certainly if all of a sudden someone who has shared a different worldview for decades changes it almost overnight, you got to be a little bit suspicious of their motives.
Yeah, certainly, in the era that I grew up in the 80s and 90s, if someone had a radical change of heart, let's say someone was a communist and then they became a capitalist, they were expected to give some kind of accounting of how they got from here to there. Can you explain your big U-turn so that you are now saying the things that are opposite to the things that you used to say? You notice how interesting it is that none of these people who have made this U-turn, Tucker and Candace being notable examples, have ever given any kind of explanation of how this came to be. It's kind of like you used to be an atheist and now you're a Christian. Why? Or the opposite. You used to be a Christian, now you're an atheist. Why? So the oddity here is that they've made the U-turn. You are essentially dealing with a completely different Candace than the one that I've known over the years, and I've known Tucker for more than 25 years. We have a new Tucker. And a lot of people who supported these guys are just baffled because they were fans of the old Candace and they were fans of the old Tucker. And it's difficult for them to accept that even though it's the same face and the same name, you're really looking at two different people.
You really are. During the lockdown era of the scamdemic, I did an event with Mark Victor Hansen. He was one of the creators of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series of books, along with Jack Canfield. And we created something we called Your Finest Hour. And he and I brought a whole bunch of really cool people to talk, people from business, people from entertainment. Judge Ken Starr was there, and Candace Owens was there. And it was 2020, so it was still the old Candace, and she was terrific, and she was great. And then all of a sudden, she sounds like a radical Islamist anti-Semite. And Tucker Carlson, man, I love this guy. I've never met him, don't know him at a personal level. But when he brought the president of Iran on his podcast after the United States bombed the nuclear facilities in Iran, I just lost all respect for him. And I thought, I can't follow this guy. He doesn't believe what I believe anymore. And anybody who platforms the mouthpiece of the most evil regime on the planet, the most anti-human regime on the planet, is not a friend to me or the Iranian people. And that was very disheartening for me, but also it was a moment of moral clarity at the same time.
No, it's true. I think what's odd is that even his most kind of groyperish supporters won't defend Tucker's positions. So sometimes when I will post about Tucker, and I was posting about it a lot a couple of months ago, I've pulled back on it because I sort of feel like I've said my piece. But people will be like, Dinesh, why are you doing this? And I'm like, well, are you saying that you agree with Tucker that, let's say, you think the Maduro regime is actually, quote, socially conservative? Dead silent. Yeah. Do you agree that like Sharia law makes a society more orderly, and like you think that Sharia is a good way to go for the world and for America? Dead silence. You think Hamas is not a terrorist group really, but just kind of a political group like the Labour Party? Dead silence. So you just go down the list and you realize that they go, well, don't try to cancel Tucker. And I'm like, I've never actually called for Tucker to be restricted in any way. I'm merely disagreeing with him and merely criticizing his positions. And it looks like you won't defend them and he doesn't defend them either. I mean, Tucker will say things that are absolutely outlandish. Christian Zionism is one of the greatest heresies from the beginning of time. You're like, there are whole books on Christian heresies, and Christian Zionism does not even appear in them. So just to make these preposterous statements unsupported and then just move on to the next one is highly irresponsible. And so there's been I think there's a project here to confuse and divide the MAGA movement, but I think the mainstream of it is holding firm.
So, as we seek to wrap up this episode, Dinesh, what do you think those of us that want to see the MAGA movement continue to grow and prosper and succeed? Because I don't think we just need one Trump term in order to get rid of the rot in the United States and in Western society as a whole. We're going to need, I think, a minimum 2 terms of say, J.D. Vance if he becomes the nominee, and I think he will. And then hopefully even another 2 terms after that of Marco Rubio. So I'd love to see 20 years of Republican dominance at the presidential level, as well as at the legislative level, with brave men that are going to take action to reverse the rot. So what do we have to do, those of us in the grassroots, as it were, to make sure that those that are trying to sow division and confusion are not successful?
Well, the country is on a knife edge. It hangs in the balance. And we, won in 2024, but it's precarious for 26 and very open-ended for 28. The way to fix the country, we actually need a 50-seat majority in the House and 65 Republican senators. Because to make institutional and meaningful change, you need decisive control of all three branches of government. By the way, FDR had that in the 30s and early 40s. LBJ had that. We haven't really had that. Reagan did not have that. No. And Trump hasn't had that in either of his terms. I mean, we're dealing with a razor-thin House majority and a fairly precarious Senate majority, particularly with the filibuster. You basically need 60 votes to make dramatic change. Our country has some very serious problems, some of which go back 100 years. Problems that have to do with the fact, for example, that, essentially the federal treasury has become a trough at which all kinds of groups are just greedily feeding and essentially robbing the taxpayer. The Somali fraud is just the tip of that iceberg. And so there's an institutional problem here that I can go into it, but probably don't need to here. It's ultimately our founding structure has been altered by the progressive movement, starting with FDR, continuing with LBJ. It's almost like you had, if FDR was a kind of fat kid, LBJ is more like an obese adolescent, and now we're dealing with a morbidly obese adult. I'm just talking here about the federal government.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of work to be done to put us on the right track. It's certainly not going to happen. I would argue it's really the work of a generation.
Yeah. Amen. Well said. So, Dinesh, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us here today. We end off every episode by asking you, as our guest expert, to give us your 3 top expert action steps. These are your 3 best pieces of life and success advice in bullet point form to help my listener take their projects to the next level. So what say you?
I would say number 1, particularly in an age of scrolling and social media, devote some time to reading really good books. And I'm talking about books that you hold in your hand, where you read a page or two, and then you can sit back and think for a couple of minutes about what you just read, digest it. So in other words, contemplation, reflection, careful reading, very important. Yep. And you know, whether it's your interests are political philosophy or history, just don't let those habits that many of us developed, when we were younger, don't lose that. The second thing is that I would say, to be effective in communicating today, it is very important to appeal to the head and the heart. I say this because I do not agree with the doctrine, sometimes connected with Ben Shapiro, facts don't care about your feelings. We're human beings. Our sense of justice, for example, is fired by emotion. It's indignation. For example, when I see images of what's going on in Iran, I am like filled with rage against the mullahs, and I am moved by what I see. So those are very powerful emotions, and in politics, you don't want to set them to the side. Listen, I'm going to give you some data on the Iranian Revolution. No, you want to make arguments that tap into reason and emotion both. And this is particularly important for me in making films. An effective film is really an entertainment. Sometimes people say, well, Dinesh, you need to do some messaging on immigration. And I'm like, well, people don't go to a movie for messaging. They go to a movie to enjoy it. Now, if you make an enjoyable movie with a powerful story, you can put a lot of messaging into it. But the success of the film will be driven by the power, the intellectual and emotional power of the narrative.
Yes. Great. And the final expert action step?
The final step, I would say, is the spiritual dimension, and by that I mean, and this is really a key theme in my new film, The Dragon's Prophecy. That sort of there's a great war between good and evil that has raged since the beginning of time, and a lot of the events that we see in the world in front of us are a reflection of this cosmic battle. What I'm saying is that there's a world behind the world. I mean, all the great religions of the world know this, but it's also something that I think is a very practical insight for life, and that is to try to see things in their largest perspective. Even anti-Semitism, for example, I'll talk to secular Jews, and they'll be like, I don't understand anti-Semitism, Dinesh. Why does everybody hate us? And I'm like, well, if you try to look at it purely from a secular angle, yes, there is some explanation. That's envy. There's a bunch of different factors that have fueled anti-Semitism, but you'll never feel that it's a satisfactory explanation. There's some other element involved, and that is the spiritual dimension that often gets missed. So that's my third kind of piece of advice. Be attuned, be alert, and always seek that kind of larger dimension, because it actually gives you a fuller picture of the world we live in.
These are three very thoughtful expert action steps. In fact, they may be the most thoughtful I've ever heard in over 1,000 of these episodes. So God bless you, brother. Dinesh D'Souza, it's an honor to have had this chance to sit down with you. Thank you so much for your time. And as an Iranian, I want to just especially say thank you for the love and support you're showing my people. They are the bravest and the best of us, honestly, in this world today. And voices like yours, using your platform to amplify this and get the attention of President Trump, and voices like the Wayne Allen Root, God bless him. He's been reaching out to President Trump and asking him to put out statements of support. They mean the world. They give us so much heart and hope. So please keep it up. Please, please, please.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
God bless you. And that's a wrap.
This episode has been brought to you by eCircleAcademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.